The GMC Typhoon is an absolute enigma. With a turbocharged V6 from the factory in the early 90s, this was one of the fastest production cars you could buy. In a lot of ways, I see this as the 90s track hawk of the day, and rightly so. So if you've never experienced the GMC Typhoon, hop on in and let me take you for a ride in one of the weirdest cars GM has ever built. This seatbelt style is how you know you're in an old car. One of the weirdest cars GMC ever made, and I finally get to drive one. Huge thanks to Gateway Classic Cars for letting me drive this thing. I saw it in the showroom today and I said, holy smokes, I've never seen a Typhoon in person. And they said, you can drive it. So here I am. Essentially, this was one of the fastest cars in the early 90s, including against Ferraris. But it was an SUV. The button in the transmission is old, and the gear shifter, so I had to use 2 thumbs because I'm a weakling. Oh my God, guys, I cannot believe I'm driving a GMC Typhoon. I've always wanted to drive one of these, especially after learning about the GMC Syclone, which this is based on. The GMC Syclone is the truck which uses the same exact engine as this. Now, this engine is super odd to be out of an American car. Kind of like the vibe of a Buick Grand National, right? Using a turbocharged V6 engine rather than a V8. This uses a 4.3 liter turbocharged V6 with a Borg Warner turbo on it. So Borg doing cool things all the way back in the day. This thing did 0 to 60 in 5.1 seconds, made 280 horsepower, and did the quarter mile in 14.1 seconds. Now, to give you perspective, for today's standards, doesn't sound that fast. But during then, it was pretty freaking fast. Especially going against things like Fox bodies and stuff, and even the Ferrari 308, this thing could outrun it, which is bananas. But the special thing about the Typhoon engine is that it had 350 foot-pounds of torque. So even though you don't have that horsepower, the 280 horsepower, you have a ton of torque. So you're getting off the line very quickly. The power goes to all 4 wheels in 1991. And 35% up front, 65% out back. So that's the distribution of the power. So that way you can get off the line as quickly as possible. And you did about 95 miles an hour in the quarter mile at the very end. So to give you perspective, it was still pretty quick even later in the 90s and early 2000s. There's plenty of cars that this thing could outrun, and it was still an SUV. The first time I saw the GMC Typhoon was actually on Forza Motorsport. And I was like, what is that thing? Like, why is this in the game? But I had no idea the kind of legacy this thing had. Now, I am having to add input to keep this thing kind of a little straight, going back and forth. Back in the day when this car came out, Car and Driver's main criticism of it was the plastic interior. It is, you know, basically a Jimmy interior. The engine is a modified version of the standard GMC Jimmy engine. And it also uses the throttle body from a 5.7 liter small block engine. It has a whole bunch of weird caveats with kind of the valve train system, the intake plenum. There's a lot of weird things they did to this thing to make it work. But that's what makes the Typhoon so peculiar and odd. When you see them, they are truly a unicorn. The transmission's actually an automatic 4-speed 4L60 transmission. Also, I want to talk about the shape of this vehicle. You can tell it's an SUV. It was never meant to tow things. It was never meant to haul things. It has like a 600-pound weight limit or something like that. It's weird that it's a 2-door SUV. In theory, this was kind of like the track hawk of the day. If you want to make comparisons of today, this was meant to be a fast SUV by GMC. Also, the gauges are so freaking colorful. You have a turbo gauge, which is yellow, and it says plus 15 turbo or minus 15. So it's essentially a really old boost gauge. And as you tap on it, the gauge is going up and down. Head unit, standard old head unit. It's also got a cigarette lighter. That's how you also know you're of the times. Now, let's be real here. The steering wheel is super goofy looking. It's as 90s as it gets. It's this 4-spoke, weird looking thing. Has a decent material around it, but you can tell that it hasn't aged well. The entire dash is standard GM from the 90s. And there's a ton of space. If you fold down the seats back there, you have just this massive, massive area to put stuff in. But the transmission shifts a lot like that Trans Am I drove recently with the turbocharged V6 from the Buick Grand National. That's what I'm kind of getting the vibe of driving this thing around, just that I'm sitting higher up. The black leather seats in this thing are mint. The interior is absolutely mint in this thing. And you can just tell that the steering is, there's not a lot going on. There's a lot of dead space when you're going like this. The GMC Typhoon also wasn't made very much. It was made in a very limited number, but it was under 10,000. So it's a really rare occasion if you do see these on the street. It's very hard to find them. So that's why I was kind of, you know, drooling when I saw it. Also, the wheels, I love like the razor blade style wheel. It's just so of the time. I love it. It's funny that there's faster cars today, but when people see the Typhoon, it still has this presence of, don't mess with that thing. It's a sleeper, you know what I mean? But as you can see, as I just drive it down the street, whole thing's shaking. Okay, it literally sounds like a Typhoon. It's like all induction noise. You don't really get a blow off. You don't really get the V6 that much. It's this very peculiar wind kind of vibe. It's a Typhoon, but a bad joke. But at the same time, it's very odd, the sound this thing makes. It like, oh, please turn. Okay, yeah, throttle, it's all right. It's not too bad. Yeah, I definitely know they're not the same, but this definitely reminds me of that Trans Am I drove. I know I said that earlier, but it definitely gives off that vibe of that Turbo 6 that was in the Trans Am. Oh my, okay, you start picking up, the hood is moving. But because of the rarity, because of how unique it is, I think that's where the legacy of the Typhoon really lies. It's not so much that it's the fastest car in the planet anymore, the fastest SUV anymore. It's one of those things where it's interesting to see the evolution of the idea of a fast SUV by an American car company. I drove an 800 wheel horsepower Trackhawk the other day.
It'll move, man.
And it's like, what world do we live in? And I'm sure people, when they first got in the Typhoon, felt the exact same way. They're like, what am I driving right now? A 14-second freaking truck or SUV? Amazing. Also, it has this itty-bitty little wing on the back, just sitting at a very unique angle. It's probably for a reason I don't know, but it's sitting at this almost flush angle with the windshield, or the rear windshield, excuse me. And it looks like it's hanging on for dear life. Oh! It's kind of hard to know how fast you're going because the gears are so freaking long. All right, Welchie corner. Please, Typhoon, don't be mean to me. If you look at a steering wheel and you have the spokes completely vertical, that's where I'm at, almost full lock. Oh my God, I feel like I'm driving a yacht. I will have to say though, you'll probably not get in trouble driving this thing because it definitely does not look the part. Oh, that shift though. So GMC Typhoon, have you ever seen one? What do you think of them? Do you think they're overrated? Do you think they really don't deserve the legacy they have? Or do you think it's just an oddball in the industry? Personally, I just think it's such a weird car, and just the fact you can get on it. And it makes all these really unique, weird sounds. I've never heard a car that sounds like this. On that note, I upload on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, and I will see you guys next time. Take it easy. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.